We are reading Vampires in Their Own Story, an anthology of vampire voices edited by Michelle Bellinger. And this is going to be part 3. We're still on the introduction. Going to be a long time before we get done with this. All of this was happening well away from my small hometown in Ohio. However, 1998 events conspired to bring me in contact with Father Sebastian of the Gotham scene. Much to my surprise, he had heard of me and the ISV. He and others urged me to move my work onto the internet. This is also where I was introduced to Sebastian's version of the Black Veil. He had been using it as a code to conduct mainly in the New York nightclub where members of the Sanguinarium met. With the tragedies of Rodney Farrell and Susan Welch still fresh in my mind, I felt this ethical code could have a much wider application. I asked permission to rewrite it completely, moving it away from the primary code of secrecy and exercising any remaining traces of the influence of Vampire the Masquerade. Hoping that this could eventually become the vampire version of the Wiccan Read, I wrote 13 tenets that focused on mutual respect, ethical behavior, and a positive sense of community. We launched a new version of the Black Veil in 2000, and it instantly gained widespread popularity. They also had many, many parties in New York. That's all I have to say. Also in the year, Father Sebastian published a version of the Codex as a companion piece to that year's installment of the Vampire Almanac. I can't say it. The Vampire Almanac. The book became so popular among members of the growing community that I then donated a version of the Internet Sacred Text Archive in online resource. With its information on feeding techniques, it encouraged vampires to be aware of their needs and to make educated decisions about how, when, and where to feed. Although an expanded edition of this codex was picked up by Wiser Books in 2004, the online version can still be found for free on countless vampire websites. I'm not entirely comfortably singing the praises of my own book, but at this point, it was almost impossible to have a discussion about modern vampire subculture without mentioning the codex. What the book did for the vampire community was to put in plain and accessible terms that which most vampires were already doing. Explain the process of feeding, approaching this as something that could be done positively and willingly and informed donors. It did not have the equivalent of psychic rape, and it could, in fact, be an intimate and beautiful sharing. The Order of Vampire and the TOV may have been teaching metaphysical techniques for taking energy for many years, but they tended to approach upon the vampire as a predator, encouraging members to learn vampirism as a way of gaining powers over others. In addition to the negative practice, what informed the information they had was reserved for paying members exclusively. I felt the information should be out there and free so vampires could decide for themselves to practice ethically. In the early stages of the community, many vampiric individuals felt a need for life without ever understanding or even questioning why. I stopped to question. I needed to understand that the need was more than just a delusion in order to accept it. And in my search for answers, I found many underlying metaphysical principles in the energetic and mystical traditions of other cultures. From the yoga of the Hindus to Taoism and Chinese, vampirism, as I discovered, was hardly new, unusual, or strange. In most Asian traditions, it accepted as a fact that people interact with energy all the time. The confusion for vampires here was born in the West comes from the complete lack of context for this need. I wrote the Codex because I wanted vampires like myself to know that they were not alone, and I wrote it because I was hoping to save some of them from the bitter mistakes I made while learning to control my own needs. Vampires and energy. For the most part, the individuals involved in the modern vampire community identify with the figure of vampire because of the word vampire is one of the few words we have in the English language to indicate someone who feeds upon life. Western culture doesn't even have much context for the idea of life energy. almost all of the words and terms that we currently are borrowed from other cultures. Prana, the Hindu word which means breath and spirit, and it's connected with certain energy-raising techniques in the discipline of yoga, such as the potent breathing technique pranayama. Qi, another word that will often appear in discussion of life energy, is a Chinese term. Qi is founded upon the concept in many aspects of Taoism, and it also plays a role in everything from martial arts to traditional Chinese medicine. Qi, the version of Qi, is connected with the practice of Reiki, a kind of laying on hands method of healing that was imported from West Japan via Hawaii. And part of the word Reiki, Qi, is the energy being harnessed by the healer using the technique. Only in the past few decades have techniques like Reiki and yoga gained popular acceptance here in the West. Many people remain skeptical about them, but major hospitals and clinics have nevertheless become integrated with time-honored traditions into their more standard therapies. The Cleveland Clinic, a world-renowned institute of healing, has run experiments to test the impact of energy upon the healing process, and hospitals around the country have started to suggest yoga, tai chi as part of the healthy exercise routine. For the most part, underlying energetic principles of these techniques remain mystery to most of the Western thinkers, but gradually the idea of vital energy is streaking into our own culture. Vampires like myself have no choice but to develop some understanding of that vital energy early in our lives. We often had no idea what to call it, but the instinct to take it remained, and the instinct was reinforced by distinct repercussions of our own health and well-being when we failed to give up the impulse. There has been much debate, both within the vampire community and the outside of it, as to what makes a person vampiric. Many non-vampires who nevertheless believe in magic and vital energy argue that there is enough energy in the universe to go around, and the act of taking vitality from another is an affront to a generosity and intended ballast of divinity. Time and time again, I have encouraged pagans and Wiccans who simply cannot accept the idea of a vampire's need, when that need is exactly what has convinced most of the people in my community to adopt the term vampire in the first place. Where are there certain people in the modern vampire community who identify with this archetype, not because they themselves are vampiric, but because they find the archetype of the vampire seductive and personally empowering? There remains a number of individuals whom the term vampire has a really very real and personal repercussions. Psychic vampires, as well as some blood drinkers, believe that their energy, their very health, depends upon the act of taking another person's energy. This belief has been formulated through repeated experiences during which, abstaining from that energy, the vampire's health has gone into decline. It is worth noting that many vampiric individuals were, like myself, born with a serious health condition and birth defects. One way I've been able to put vampirism into context is by comparing it to healing, only in reverse. In energy healing techniques such as Reiki, the healer places his or her hand on the patient and channels the energy into that person in order to help alleviate the illness, disease, or pain. A vampire engages in a proactive version of this self-same healing. Instead of waiting for a healer to come to them, vampires connect with the energy of others, drawing this energy into themselves and using it to heal their own complaints. The next question I inevitably encounter: why take energy from people? Isn't there abundant energy on the earth, the stars, even the trees? The answer to this question reveals why. Even though I'm not always comfortable with the word, the term vampire really fits people like me. We wouldn't be tempted to call someone a vampire if they had this overwhelming energetic need, but only fed upon trees. Witches and other magical practitioners draw from energy from natural sources all the time, especially when raising energy for ritual. Ordinary people also take energy from their environment as natural part of living. Just as we breathe oxygen and take food in for nourishment, so do our bodies need energy in order to maintain healthy functioning. But vampires are vampires because there is a significant and distinct limitation to the type of energy that fulfills our needs. Although many vampires have the ability to sense and harness energy of other types, only the energy of other human beings seems adequate for maintaining our health and our well-being. I have spent more long hours trying to determine why this is true. As far as the issue goes, there is almost as much theories in the vampire community as there are vampires to voice those theories. When I first tried to deduce the cause of vampirism, I often noticed that many vampiric people exhibited significant damage or deformity to key energy centers, particularly the second chakra at the navel, though sometimes in other areas as well. Sometimes this damage seemed like scarring. Sometimes it was the result of very severe energetic blockages. Sometimes it would just seem as if this particular person's chakra functioned differently. Whatever the root cause, the end result meant that this chakra in question possessed energy in a way that was impaired or changed. Vampirism resulted when that impairment or change impacted the way the person connected to, processed, or otherwise digested the outside energy. Other vampires appear to have a more or less normal energetic system, but they burn through energy so quickly that they have to take massive amount, and it's almost always constantly. Think of such peoples with their hyperactive spiritual metabolism. If energy were food, then they needed their food in the most potent and efficient form possible in order to keep up with the heightened need. Energy that we draw from outside ourselves still has to go through a process much like digestion, during which we turn from earth or tree energy to energy keyed for the human system. What is more efficient then, but to take the energy directly from its source, thus cutting out the need to digest it at all. Another theory I encountered was through a Taoist friend. In Taoism, Qigong is Qigong. In Taoism, Qigong and related Asian practices, energy works are taught to draw in their power from the natural world. Mountains, clear, powerful rivers, expansive forests, all of these are a potent strength of energy. Now consider our Western culture. How many of these natural sources have become diminished? How many people have access to the pristine natural spaces? Even if they have access, how many people bother to take the time? But the body still needs energy, and so it adapts naturally to its own environment. Of natural living things, what is the most abundant and widely available source in a city? People. Other human beings being comprised of the most widespread source of vital energy in an urban environment. My Taoist friend suggested that vampires are not strictly limited to human vital energy. Human energy is simply the most abundant form to which they have access in increasingly metropolitan world. Given that so many vampires live in a big, bustling cities, I have to admit that I saw the reasoning behind these ideas. Okay, I will stop here, and I'm going to continue on, and this is going to be a very long book, but I'm enjoying this because I find this very, very interesting. So until next time, stay tuned.